Hi guys, it's Jen back here again. How are we all doing? So it's definitely been a while since I last made a video. I feel like my channel is all over the place at the moment. But I have been thinking about just trying to make quality content that resonated with my philosophies, my ideas, kind of what I'm studying and I'm interested in at the very moment. One of those videos, or one of the topics that I have been contemplating about making videos for, has been Carl Jung's original theory of psychological types. It's a little bit different from how most people, or what most people are familiar with, which is the Myers-Briggs. And anyone who is subscribed to my channel or clicked on this video would probably know that the premise to MBTI is that you have 4 letters and they each represent a certain orientation. It was derived from Carl Jung's theory of psychological types, and he wrote that theory in 1923, I believe. He had been inspired to come up with this theory based on his experience as a psychologist. Jungian typology, very based on the idea of conscious and unconscious contents in someone's psyche. If any of you have read Carl Jung or have been interested in his work, you will know that he was inspired by Freud, and he started off basing a lot of his ideas and theories on psychoanalysis. We can broadly define it as being interested in the unconscious contents of a human being. So with Freud, he started off with the Iceberg theory, which I explained in a previous video, which I'll put a link up to. Carl Jung's psychological types theory is based on psychoanalysis. It's based on the idea that we are in part conscious and in part unconscious. If we take any random person in the world and attempt to type them in a Jungian way, we'll first have to ask whether that person is introverted or extroverted. So those are the primary attitudes of someone's personality. If this individual is introverted, so in his conscious awareness, he knows he's introverted. However, with every conscious awareness, with every conscious element of a personality, there is a counterpart, which is the unconscious element. And the unconscious elements are either repressed or they are not your preference or orientation. If you're introverted, your unconscious is extroverted. Okay, so let's take that introversion attitude. Now we need to ask ourselves whether this person is a rational judger or an irrational perceiver. Jung sees the rational judging functions as being thinking and feeling. So what does it mean to have a rational judging function? We have perceiving functions and we have judging functions. So our perceiving functions are the functions we use to take in information, to perceive information from the outside. The irrational perceiving functions are intuition and sensing. So the reason why intuition and sensing is referred to as irrational and perceiving is because we don't assign a task to them. The Jungian idea of personality typology is that each person has a main function. Each person has a primary, or he also calls it a principal function. If your main function is intuition and your preferred attitude is introversion, then your principal function would be introverted intuition. Similarly, if your preferred attitude is extraversion and your main function is thinking, then your principal function would be extraverted thinking. Your principal function, which is made up of a combination of your preferred attitude and your preferred or dominant function, is basically your most conscious way of interacting with the world and experiencing life. So if NI, or introverted intuition, is your principal function, you will have a opposite attitude that is inferior in your personality. So if your principal function is introverted intuition, then your inferior function, which resides in the unconscious, has an opposite attitude and nature to that function. So the opposite attitude would be extraversion, and the opposite function would be sensing. The next part of Jungian theory is establishing what the auxiliary function is. So according to Jung, the auxiliary function is the function that backs up your principal function. It has to complement the primary function. It can't work in opposition to the principal function. If your principal function is a perception function, then your auxiliary function needs to be a judging function, because another perceiving function would interfere with the workings of the principal function. The possible functions to act as an auxiliary function for NI would either be thinking or feeling. In the book, Jung doesn't say anything about the attitude of the auxiliary function, whether it should be introverted or extroverted. The possible auxiliary functions for introverted intuition can be thinking, so whether it's TI or TE, or feeling, FE or FI. Jung refers the conscious functions as the principal function, so the first, and the auxiliary function, the second. So those two functions at the top are conscious, whereas the bottom two functions, your inferior and your tertiary functions, would be unconscious. So if we have a conscious auxiliary function, we will have an unconscious inferior function to the auxiliary, which we know as the tertiary. I think the best way to look at it is mapping those four functions on a Freudian iceberg. So the very tip of the iceberg, the most conscious part of our personality, would be our primary function. And then under that would be our auxiliary function, which is, just above the water, I guess. It's helping our primary function. And then underneath the water, which is where the unconscious resides, we have our bottom functions. So our tertiary, than our inferior, which functions like the id. So that includes my attempt at reiterating and summarizing Jungian typology as I know it. To me, I think it's very important to understand where MBTI comes from. I think it's important to understand the mind that created or came up with the functions. Jung based his theory on studying his patients in psychotherapy and, through years of being a psychologist. Carl Jung never intended for psychological types to become a personality inventory. It's not about categorizing and putting people into boxes. The fundamental basis for psychological types or Jungian typology is the unconscious, psychoanalytic theory, the idea that every conscious element to a personality has a counteractive unconscious element. If we attempt to look at ourselves as personalities on a much deeper level than simply introversion, extraversion, or our functions, anything that is conscious to us is just the ego. It's not the entirety of your psyche or your personality. It is about understanding yourself on a much deeper level, attempting to reach the unconscious, attempting to recognize what's in your unconscious based on what you know about yourself in conscious awareness. So if you know you're intuitive, you know for sure that you navigate the world in a very intuitive manner or a very emotional manner. You have to know that there is a part inside of you that is the complete opposite to that. And I think that sheds light into yourself as a human being on a much more profound and interesting level. So I will end the video here, but please let me know if you want any more videos or any more information in regards to psychological types, and I will try my best to answer those questions.